In an early medieval cemetery at Altenerding, Bavaria, one woman carried a mark no one could miss. Her skull had been deliberately lengthened in childhood. Among the people buried around her, its shape stood apart. Her grave looked local. Her DNA did not. Women buried with this form of skull modification were genetically far more diverse than the surrounding community. And most traced their closest ancestry towards southeastern Europe. That is the first crack in the familiar story. German ancestry did not begin inside sealed Germanic tribes. This woman was not a modern German, and no one around her used that national label. But people had already crossed enormous distances and entered local communities centuries before Germany existed. She was not the beginning. Ancient DNA reaches beneath her grave into migrations that changed Central Europe on a far larger scale. One Germanic core cannot explain what it finds. The missing story starts beneath a modern city, almost 7 millennia earlier. The trail jumps back beneath Stuttgart. A woman buried there roughly 7,000 years ago belonged to the first widespread farming culture of Central Europe. Her genome stood far from the hunter-gatherers who had lived farther west and north. Its strongest affinities led toward the early farmers of Anatolia and the Aegean. Farming did not drift across Europe as an idea. People carried animals, crops, houses, and a way of life that could support larger settled communities. Farming moved because farmers moved. But the older inhabitants did not vanish. Over the generations, hunter-gatherer ancestry rose again inside farming communities. Newcomers and residents met, had children, and changed the population again. What emerged belonged fully to neither earlier world. That pattern would repeat. The first farmers changed the landscape. The older inhabitants changed their descendants. Together, they formed the first deep layer beneath later German ancestry, thousands of years before Germanic languages existed. But the Stuttgart woman was missing a component that would later spread across much of Central Europe, and it was approaching from the east. About 4,500 years ago, corded ware graves began appearing across much of Central and Northern Europe. The pottery and burial customs changed, but the ancestry shifted even more sharply. Corded ware individuals buried in what is now Germany traced about 75% of their ancestry to populations related to Yamnaya herders from the Pontic-Caspian steppe. Thousands of miles separated the burial grounds, yet the genetic connection remained page unmistakable. Pottery can cross a frontier without families moving. An ancestry shift this large cannot. This was not a fashion moving west. This was a migration. The newcomers did not erase every earlier lineage. They mixed with descendants of farmers and hunter-gatherers already living in Europe. But the scale of the movement permanently altered the ancestry of the region. It also strengthened the case that at least some Indo-European languages reached Central Europe with these migrations. The 75% estimate belongs to those ancient corded ware burials, not to Germans today. It also does not make their language Germanic. Germanic languages emerged much later, after centuries of cultural and linguistic change. The prehistoric foundations were now in place: hunter-gatherer ancestry, early farmers from the southeast, and steppe-related newcomers. None of these populations was German, because history had not yet created that name. Thousands of years later, the Altenerding woman would be buried on land already transformed by this migration. Her journey was later. Human movement was not. The next transformation would show how dangerously misleading such names can become. From Rome's side of the Rhine and Danube, the people beyond the frontier looked like one world. Roman writers called many of them Germanic. The name sounded precise, but the reality was not. On the ground were rivals with different histories, alliances, and homelands. Ancient genomes confirm that some of them moved far. From the first centuries of the Common Era, ancestry connected to northern Germany and Scandinavia appeared east toward the Vistula, south into Central Europe and Italy, and west toward Britain. Some of those movements align with historically Germanic-speaking groups. But the graves destroy the simple picture of one people carrying one ancestry. Men and women buried in Longobarд settings could carry northern ancestry or ancestry closer to local Central Europeans. Early Bavarian communities also drew from more than one source. A burial style, a tribal name, and a genome were not the same thing. Movement was real. So was incorporation. Germanic was not a genetic type. It described languages and changing social worlds. Those worlds expanded with migrants, but also through marriage, alliance, adoption, and local participation. The label could absorb people as readily as armies could move them. Rome had named the tribes, but DNA reveals the people entering them. Then Roman power itself began to collapse, and in southern Germany, the argument stopped being abstract. It entered the family. At Altenerding in Bavaria, one cemetery records the transformation almost generation by generation. In its earliest phase, people with ancestry resembling Iron Age Northern Europeans were already living near Rome's old frontier. Their relatives linked nearby settlements into a regional network. Then Roman state structures collapsed in the late 5th century, and the cemetery changed with them. New burials carried connections toward Roman provincial communities, the Western Mediterranean, and Southeastern Europe. The range widened suddenly. Rome's political order was disappearing, but the people shaped by it were not. People from the world of Roman towns and forts were entering rural settlements. They did not remain socially separate. Family trees reconstructed from the graves reveal widespread intermarriage, while burial customs show little systematic division by background. Children carried the Roman and Northern worlds inside the same households. Families formed the bridge. Southern Germany was not rebuilt by conquest alone, or by an untouched provincial population. Northern settlers and diverse provincial families entered the same communities. The old frontier began disappearing inside households. By the early 7th century, their descendants already fell close to the genetic range of modern Central Europeans, including Southern Germans. Northern networks may also have helped early Germanic dialects become dominant where Latin and local languages had been common. The Altenerding woman no longer looks like an exception. She belongs to an age in which distant family lines were being pulled into local communities. But the South cannot explain Germany's East. Beyond the Elbe and Saale, a different demographic shock was about to redraw the map. Between the 6th and 8th centuries, settlements associated with early Slavic culture spread across eastern Germany and much of Central and Southeastern Europe. For decades, the argument remained open. Had existing communities adopted a new language and material culture, or had people moved with them? The Elbe-Saale DNA gives a blunt answer. In the examined Eastern German transect, migrants connected to Eastern Europe replaced more than 80% of the preceding local gene pool. This was not the arrival of a small male elite. Families moved, and some earlier inhabitants were incorporated. Language did not arrive alone, neither did culture. The East was transformed. The number is regional. It does not describe all of Germany or every place in medieval sources called Slavic. But inside the sampled Elbe-Saale corridor, cultural change came with a major demographic shift. Nor did that ancestry vanish when German-speaking settlement later expanded eastward. Present-day people from Saxony still carry a substantial Slavic period signal. Among the Sorbs of Upper Lusatia, who preserved a West Slavic language, the connection is stronger still. Southern Germany had been reshaped by Northern and Roman provincial families entering the same communities. The sampled East had been reshaped by migration from Eastern Europe. One future country now contained sharply different medieval pasts. Modern DNA would reveal whether they remained separate islands or dissolved into a wider map. Travel from Germany's northern border toward the Alps, then east toward Saxony. The ancestry pattern changes gradually, not at a national checkpoint. Families rooted near one another tend to share slightly more ancestry. Distance leaves a trace. Borders do not contain it. The north leans toward neighboring northwestern Europe and Scandinavia. The south reflects histories shaped along the Rhine and Danube. In Saxony and Lusatia, the eastern medieval layer remains visible. But no genetic wall surrounds Germany. Across the country, the differences are subtle and overall structure is low. The pattern continues outward toward Dutch, Danish, Polish, Czech, Austrian, Swiss, and French neighbors. These are gradients, not sealed boxes. This map comes from selected families with long regional roots, not from every person living in Germany today. More recent journeys have added histories the comparison was never designed to capture. Regional variation survives inside a broad field of overlap. Her ancestry can be mapped. The meaning of the Altenerding woman's local burial still cannot. The untold DNA story of the German people is not one Germanic bloodline surviving untouched. It is a sequence of arrivals, early farmers, hunter-gatherer descendants, steppe-related newcomers, northern communities beyond Rome, provincial families crossing a collapsing frontier, and Slavic settlers reshaping the East. Not one origin, a sequence. The nation came last. Their descendants were joined by villages, marriage networks, languages, kingdoms, laws, memory, and eventually nationhood. German DNA is not the substance of one ancient tribe. It is an archive of movement and mixture across different regions and different centuries. That makes the woman with the lengthened skull more than a foreign footnote. Her ancestry had traveled. Her burial was local. She entered a community and became part of what followed. DNA can trace the journey, but it cannot mark the instant ancestry becomes belonging. The German people were not waiting in one prehistoric grave. They emerged through the generations that connected the graves together. The graves were separate. The history was not. Which layer of Germany's DNA history surprised you most? Share it in the comments. And subscribe for more evidence-led stories about the ancestry hidden beneath modern identities.